Hello and welcome to Belfast Iconoclast. In this episode, I talked to Dr. Marie Moran about her work in social justice organisation ATTAC, and then I talked to councillor Emmet McDonough-Brown from the Alliance Party about his opinion on the Belfast Telegraph article about inappropriate expenses in Belfast City Council. You might remember from the very first episode of this podcast that I interviewed Nick Dearden, the director of campaign group Global Justice Now, who was at the launch of Global Justice Belfast. Also present was Dr. Marie Moran from social justice group ATTAC. I spoke to Marie to find out exactly what the connections were between ATTAC and Global Justice Now, and to ask her exactly what she'd be talking about on the night. As you'll probably be able to tell from the laughter and revelry in the background, this interview took place inside the bar right before the event.
So Global Justice Belfast is like a branch organisation of the big organisation Global Justice Now, which is based in London. My role, or the reason I'm here at all, is because I work with an organisation called ATTAC in the Republic of Ireland. And ATTAC has historic links with Global Justice Now, mainly because we work on the same kinds of issues in a European and indeed a global context. So I'm here at the launch to sort of give some insights from my work with ATTAC, and also to support Lindsay and the crew here as they get this initiative up and running.
Is Global Justice Now predominantly a UK group, or is it also international?
Global Justice Now is a UK group, but it has a global remit. ATTAC, on the other hand, is very clearly a global group. It has over 40 chapters worldwide. A good cluster of those are European, but it has a growing number of chapters in Asia, Latin America and North Africa, and of course in Southern Ireland, where my organisation is. Global Justice Now, it sort of puts on its ATTAC hat. It becomes ATTAC. It joins all the ATTAC meetings because there is no ATTAC UK. The Republic of Ireland is one of its main ones in that respect.
Do you talk predominantly about the financial tax? Is that one of your biggest or your main issue?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because ATTAC was originally set up in 1998 to campaign for a financial transaction tax. Since then, it has expanded its remit enormously and it covers a whole range of areas and a whole range of campaigns. But you're quite right to pick up on the question of what kind of connects these campaigns, and it is indeed the fact that they're all linked by a concern with the massive damage done by financial markets globally. So where ATTAC joins a particular campaign or starts a particular campaign, its emphasis is always on the unbridled power of financial markets and the damage that's doing so socially, economically and ecologically, the damage it's doing to our environment. The tagline of ATTAC is disarm the financial markets. So that should give you a sense of what links our campaigns and what drives us.
Would you say that ATTAC is for getting public ownership back of the banks, just like reining them in so we can use them properly for investment that really goes into the social good, or is there another element to this?
Yeah, that would be one of the 7 key principles of the ATTAC European network. What's interesting is that even though ATTAC is loosely held together by a shared sense of injustice at the damage being done by the financial markets, different chapters run different campaigns according to their national context. So whereas in an Irish context we would have pushed for nationalisation of banks, this mightn't have been the case in other European countries who are experiencing the financial crisis differently and who are experiencing austerity differently. So there isn't kind of a one-size-fits-all. We kind of operate a series of key principles, and then within the national chapters we sort of address what the most pressing and urgent issues are while still adhering broadly to these principles.
How big is the organisation in Dublin, or in Ireland at the moment?
We have about 15 to 20 active members who turn up for meetings every second week. We have about 100 passive members who kind of receive a newsletter, and then we have many followers on Facebook. We like to think we punch above our weight a little bit because of the clout of the international organisation ATTAC, and because of the size of that organisation and the fact that it's so well known. We tend to appear bigger than we are, so we might get invitations to speak to the media that another equivalent size group wouldn't necessarily get. Like a lot of activists in Ireland are aware of ATTAC from sort of the peak of anti-capitalist activism the first time around the Battle of Seattle and the protests of the World Trade Organization. setting up the World Social Forum, we rely on the might of the bigger organisation to make our claims in a context where we're jostling for space with other pro-capitalist groups, let's say.
Do you view yourselves as a replacement to other social justice movements, or do you try and link arms with them where possible?
We absolutely try and link arms with them. A lot of what we do, really, given our size, is lend our support to campaigns that are being spearheaded by other groups in an Irish context. So an obvious example is, you might know that the Irish water charges movement, anti-water charges movement Ireland, has been absolutely enormous. So we will link in, and we have linked in with a lot of local groups who are doing that kind of organising. We'll turn up at every demo and protest with our banner, which we love. It's very large, it's very red, it's very pretty, and it says "People Rise Up Against Finance." And it really catches the attention of the media and passers-by. But we use it to lend our solidarity and also to point out the role of finance in the attempts to privatise the Irish water supply. Some groups are campaigning it on the basis that it's a human right. We're lending our support to that, but we're also saying, look, we have to look at what are these pressures to monetize our natural resources? What are these pressures to introduce finance into the supply of something so basic as water, and who benefits? So we're linking arms, but we feel that we're also adding an angle, adding a component to the analysis, which is about financialisation.
Do you find yourselves linking with any political parties, or are you purely a grassroots organisation?
We're purely a grassroots organisation. We find, of course, that sometimes our positions will have affinities with those of certain political parties, and we try and sort of adopt what we think of as the Chomskyan approach, that, when it suits us, we'll row in behind a political party and say, that's a good idea, let's push for that. And then other times we'll try and name and shame and highlight some of the injustices and abuses that are overseen by various political parties. It's actually one of the founding principles of ATTAC that it is not party political. So we're very strategic in how we relate to political parties. And we do try and maintain ourselves as a grassroots organisation, open to anyone who wants to join. And I suppose another important thing to say there is that you don't have to be a financial expert. Part of our remit is educational, and we're learning ourselves constantly, because the world of finance is so complex, and it's so deliberately complex, that part of what we're trying to do is demystify that, and we educate ourselves as well as others in that process. So very much grassroots, bottom up, learning together, educating each other, and working strategically with political parties as and when it suits us.
Do you think it's important for people today, young activists, to start their own groups or join groups like yourself?
Yeah, that's another interesting question, because when we started up ATTAC for the second time in Ireland, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we recognised that, there's very good reasons to join organisations that are already up and running. And the single reason we decided to get ATTAC off the ground again was precisely because of the way it enabled us to link in with bigger European campaigns. So whereas a lot of the issues that we were facing in an Irish context felt very national, when you join in with, pan-European movements, you see the bigger structural features that link them all together. So in general, to young activists, I would say, there is no point reinventing the wheel. If there's a really good organisation, they're always going to want new members. They're always going to want your support. If you're going to start a new one, I think make sure that you've got a good reason for doing so. And, that it's not that it will be, but that it's not a kind of an ego trip, that you think, what's the best way to achieve this social justice goal? Is it by starting something new? Is it by lending support and solidarity and strength to other groups that are already working in the area? And I think there's no hard and fast answer to it. You just have to be wise and alert to the context and talk. Reach out, speak to other activists and see what they think is needed or helpful. We have a meeting every second week in Dublin. Anyone who messages on that page gets the details of the meeting, and they can turn up. They're always very welcome. People just have to attend 2 meetings for them to be deemed a fully fledged member. I do appreciate, though, because I teach a course on social justice movements in UCD, and a lot of my students say to me, I want to do something, but I don't know where to go. I don't know how to find. I don't know what organisations exist. I don't even know where to begin. And if I did find them, I'd be too intimidated to go up and, say, can I be part of this? And I think there is an onus actually there on activists themselves to, even sometimes unwittingly, I think there can be kind of a clique effect. So to be very aware of that as activists and to really try and be as open as possible and as inclusive as possible, and to engage young people in whatever way possible, which is difficult on both sides. It's difficult for young people and it's difficult for the activists to kind of even recognise that maybe they're just huddled in a corner of a pub talking about something very important politically, but actually all anybody else sees is backs to them.
Your talk today, what will the emphasis be? Could you give me a 30-second précis of what you're going to be talking about?
Right, well, I'm going to be talking, I'm going to be touching on, of course, some of the things I've already discussed with you, sort of the history of ATTAC, its impetus, the kinds of campaigns it's involved in. I want to talk a bit about the recent EU Commission ruling that Apple has to pay 13 billion in back taxes to Ireland, and I want to talk about that from a justice perspective as well as from an activist perspective. And then finally I'll say a few words about how I think Global Justice Belfast and ATTAC Ireland can work together across borders in the island of Ireland.
Would you say that international solidarity, working across borders, is one of the most important things that an activist can be thinking about today?
Yes, at one level, yes, but I find maybe at a kind of sometimes the greatest elements or moments of my activism have been rooted in local struggles, small victories, solidarity with other groups. I think they go together. I think when you find that sense of belonging and hope in a local struggle, in a local group, it probably enables you to go on to make those bigger cross-border connections and to see justice as a global issue and to see solidarity as something that has to transcend borders just as much as global finance does, but defeating it.
Acting locally and thinking globally.
Exactly.
That was Marie Moran from social justice group ATTAC. If you want to get in touch with ATTAC, you can go to their website www.attac.org. Or if you have any comments or queries about the interview itself, get in contact with us at belfasticonoclast@gmail.com or send us a message on the Facebook page Belfast Iconoclast. You can also contact us, of course, on our Twitter at BFastIconoclast. This month, the Belfast Telegraph ran a story detailing the amount of money that Belfast City Council was spending on hotels for its members. The Telegraph claims that over £40,000 of ratepayers' money is being spent by the council putting its members up, and more than £30,000 alone in the last 12 months. One of the councillors mentioned in the article was the Alliance Party's Emmet McDonough-Brown. I spoke to Emmet about the claims in the article and about the economic mission to China. We also talk about the Alliance Party's economic policies in general and their vision for Belfast.
Well, I suppose it's important to say that anything you do in public life is scrutinised. We went to China along with partners from Queen's and University of Ulster and Invest Northern Ireland on a trade mission, essentially, to talk about the opportunities in Belfast and connect with Shenyang in China, which is now our sister city.
The Telegraph article, I'm assuming that you've read it, says that it was just a ridiculous amount of money spent on hotels.
And I mean, it's important to say, I think, that whenever you go abroad, that will cost money. I think the total sums referred to in the article were about 30 or 40,000 for the year, which for an organisation that spends 100 plus million is maybe not such a large figure whenever it's taken into the round of the other activities which the organisation undertakes. But I accept that there's always a challenge function in the media around kind of how ratepayer money is spent, and it's a responsibility that I take very seriously, because the money that we raise is money that people don't have a choice about whether they pay, and we have to be absolutely clear about the purpose of our trip and crucially what we deliver whenever we return.
This is a point in time where people are facing huge cuts. Been in an age of austerity for a number of years now, so you at least can see the perspective of why the Telegraph might run such a story and why people might be irate about that sort of spending.
And that's, I suppose, in some ways one of the reasons that we take these sort of trips is because we are keen to build the city, we're keen to attract investment, we're keen to bring jobs in, and we're keen to show the ratepayers that the council has taken a leadership role in the regeneration of the city. So whenever we went to China, as I say, we brought our further education partners and Invest Northern Ireland, and the companies that came in that mission met with Chinese partners, and we were involved essentially in opening a door for the companies locally to walk through in terms of winning business and creating employment back home, and also for the universities to attract foreign students in to Belfast, which we hope will create a more diverse and attractive city for everybody who lives here.
Do you think that this trip will actually help Belfast or Northern Ireland?
I mean, I hope so, certainly. I mean, there's always a degree of speculation in these trips, but whenever we went out, we had a packed itinerary. We met with business and government leaders in China, and we have brought back already some concrete things around collaboration between universities in Shenyang and Queen's, and also some collaborative working between schools who wish to teach Chinese and schools in China which to teach English. So we're already making the most of the Sister Cities agreement, but it will be up to the partners in the city to really drive that phase of it. If you like, we've opened the door. It's up to the city partners now to walk through it.
I mean, it sounds just more like a cultural exchange more than anything else.
No, it was a bit more than that. Certainly the universities that we went alongside with had particular expertises that they were interested in sharing in China in return for the connections that they were making there. So some of the things which the Chinese were particularly interested in were active aging. As their population grows older, as they become more prosperous, there's certain kinds of illness which they don't have huge expertise in treating, so things like certain types of cancer. They're interested in active aging and how you manage an aging population to make sure that they stay fit and healthy. And for the education sector, what they were looking at was connections between universities which would enable students to travel between China and Belfast, and what that would mean in terms of the exchange of knowledge, particularly for someone like Queen's, who's developing its international reach and bringing students into the city. So Queen's has a campus in China, and one of the things that we were there to do was to show Queen's Chinese partners that Belfast was serious about bringing their students to our city, and that we would show the leadership required to make sure that when they came they had a good time and a quality education, and we were there essentially to beat the drum for the city.
It certainly seems like you're beating the drum for the city in terms of education, but if you ask the person on the street, they might argue that it's not more education that we need, it's actually just more jobs for people. Were there any specific economic investments that were talked about on this trip?
Well, certainly we met with a wide range of investors, including through Invest Northern Ireland, which obviously carries a more regional focus, but we were there essentially to push Belfast within that regional focus. And one of the things that we did do was we brought companies out there who are considering doing business in China to acquaint them with the business culture, to give them an appreciation of how to enter the Chinese market. And we're hopeful that those things will start to bear fruit. I mean, these were businesses that came along essentially paying a proportion of their own journey alongside Invest. So they were invested financially in the trip. So it's not the case that they just kind of attended on an invitational basis. They were selected for their sectors. And as I say, it'll be up to them to really drive the next phase of the relationship. One of the key messages that emerged before we went to China was the need for a long-term engagement. And the agreement that we've signed with Shenyang in particular, in the areas that we've signed it in, is one that we don't expect to bear fruit today or tomorrow, but to bear fruit over a longer period of time, which is why it wasn't just that the Lord Mayor and myself went, but the Chief Executive of the organisation attended as well, because she will be here for the long term, and elected members change more regularly than the Chief Executive. So the message that we were sending to our Chinese partners is that this is a relationship that we take seriously, that we value, and that we expect to be reciprocally advantageous over the period.
What sort of investment do you think you're going to be talking about? I know it's hard to put a figure on it because it is so far in the future, but do you have any details as to how much it potentially might be, or maybe specifically what types of industry the Chinese partners will be investing in? Like what types of technology, for example? Well,
I mean, we have what's called a pitch book. And the pitch book essentially is an up-to-date register of all the investment opportunities in Belfast. And the pitch book is something that the city's been developing for some time, and it's something that Invest Northern Ireland will use in the markets to pitch what the opportunities are in Belfast, be those around real estate or be they around things like technology or health and life sciences. So the opportunities which are available in Belfast are being taken into market, and the council has been involved centrally in developing that pitch book, which Invest Northern Ireland will use to sell investment opportunities in Belfast.
Will investment predominantly be on things like real estate? It shouldn't be invested in like actual jobs rather than in something that could be speculated upon?
Well, I mean, real estate produces real jobs. I mean, in the construction phase and also in the final phases. I mean, real estate is something which is important for the city as we look to bring in the sort of businesses that will drive the next phase of growth. and particularly there's a deficiency in the city of Grade A office space, which is the type of office accommodation which typically blue chip companies require for their staff and for their purposes. So whenever we talk about real estate as an opportunity, what we're really talking about is finding investments for that type of office developments in the city, which will then be used by companies who set up here in Northern Ireland.
Is this not the sort of thing that a local company could invest in?
Do you mean financially?
Yes.
Well, I mean, finance at that scale is something which tends to come from more than one source, and certainly it's something which Invest Northern Ireland, I know, are looking at kind of across the world as well as in affluent countries like China. So, I mean, there is always opportunities for funds to invest. It's just sadly that a country the size of Northern Ireland maybe doesn't operate at the sort of scale required to develop some of these projects by themselves.
What is the Alliance position on investment? What sort of investment would your party like to see?
Well, in general, we are pro-investment in the city. That would come as no great surprise. But I suppose the investment that we want to see in the city centres around economic growth and prosperity. We want to see a city which is prosperous, which is reconciled to itself, and a community which is united. And that would be our ambition for any investment projects, that they would contribute to the economic well-being of the city.
There's been a few stories over the past couple of years of various high-profile members of different parties in Stormont and in Belfast City Council proposing that major corporations get various tax breaks in order to work here in the city and work here in Northern Ireland and even work here in the UK and Ireland. What is your position on that, either yourself or your party?
Well, certainly the Alliance Party's position is that we support the reduction in the rate of corporation tax in Northern Ireland because we believe that it has the possibility to be a game changer in terms of how companies are attracted into this part of the world. I mean, that is something which obviously is contingent upon the actions of others, particularly the UK Treasury and the corporation tax in our neighbouring jurisdictions, so in the Southern Republic of Ireland and also across the water in GB. So, I mean, we are in general keen to see investment in the city because we think that it is through investments that we'll start to see the sort of social and cultural and economic change that will take Belfast from where it is at the moment to being a recognisably European and confident city.
What sort of tax rate are you talking about?
I think the rate that was set at to be hit was 12.5%.
There's certainly an argument on the left that that sort of rate is too low and that corporations shouldn't be paying that amount of tax, to come into the city or to come into the north. I believe Martino Muller has proposed that it should actually go down much less than 12.5% to bring investment in. Do you think that sort of low investment rate will actually benefit the citizens of Northern Ireland?
Well, I think it's only one part of the offer, I have to be honest. I mean, the major reasons that people invest in Northern Ireland relate to the quality of the population in terms of its education, its proximity to markets, particularly European ones, the fact that its time zone enables you to do business easily in kind of North America and in Europe, and the fact that it's an English-speaking part of the world. So, I mean, tax is only one part of the offer, if you like, about why companies should invest in Northern Ireland. And I think there are many other parts, many other strings to our bow in terms of our offer to investors.
Post-Brexit, what are the odds of companies wanted to come here and invest anyway?
Well, I mean, the vote has changed, I think, the calculus of many companies who are considering investing. I mean, obviously, we're hopeful for the best possible outcome for Northern Ireland and for Belfast. But certainly, if you look at currency, which tends to be a measure of where economists think the economy in that country is going, you've seen a significant weakening in the pound compared to the euro and the dollar. So clearly, people expect there to be some kind of bump after the vote. But at this stage, when it's not really clear what Brexit means, and the idea that Brexit means Brexit is actually tautological and meaningless, we remain to see what impact that will have in Northern Ireland, but certainly in a region which enjoys a high degree of support from Europe for farmers and through structural and regional funds. It's not too much of a stretch to say, I think, that Europe built the peace, and we will need to find a way to plug the gap which we believe Brexit will create in terms of the loss of funding from the European Union. And I think there's no indication at this stage that the Conservative government has any ambitions to replace the monies that will be lost in Northern Ireland in the short to medium term as a result of Brexit.
We are living in a time of austerity. What's the Alliance Party line on austerity?
Well, if you look certainly closer to home, you'll see that an awful lot of money is wasted on the duplication of services. So because we live in a divided society, there's a significant sum of money spent servicing that division essentially. And there are certainly several high-profile events in the last few years which you could point to and say that if we had a more reconciled society, that we wouldn't have had to spend the money in those areas. So policing controversial protests, for example, is now no longer something which comes from London. It's something which comes directly from the local budgets. And that sort of expenditure, which is unplanned and arguably undesirable, is the sort of money which we could spend improving public services or making investment in the future of the people who live here.
There was a recent bill that came in a few months ago that I think was lauded as being a big investment bill for Northern Ireland, but People Before Profit Party, who now have 2 ministers in Stormont, had said that actually there were going to be a lot of job losses because of this bill. Do you know anything about that, or do you have a take on that?
I mean, in general, I think People Before Profits have made their political reputations at this stage in the back of oppositional politics. And regardless, I think, of your kind of political orientation, there should be a wider kind of team goal for Northern Ireland, which is for parties to pull together, particularly when abroad, to show a united face and to show that people are interested in working together, because people won't kind of invest or support societies which are clearly divided and where there's an absence of political leadership. So I think it's important that, particularly for the 2 parties currently in the executive, that they show kind of unity of purpose while they're abroad. I know it's something that our ministers took very seriously when we were in the executive, that the executive had to function as one unit and as far as was possible. So I think it's important that that politics is exercised in a mature fashion.
But the huge gains made by PBP show that there's actually a section of the populace that are disillusioned with mainstream politics.
Well, I suppose, there's a lot of disillusionments, I think, in general in politics. On a practical level, I think it's important that politics is diverse and plural. And on that basis, I have no particular kind of issue with new parties entering and contesting and succeeding. It's part of the rise and fall of politics more broadly. But I accept that people do look at the system as it stands at the moment and see that there is a degree of dysfunctionality which gives them cause for concern. Certainly, as somebody who also watches TV and listens to the news at night, I often share the same sense of frustration. I suppose it's what you do with that sense of frustration, maybe that kind of alters the path somewhat. But certainly I have no particular issue with PBP. And Jerry Carroll, as you know, was formerly kind of elected here. And when we had the chance to work together, we always did.
Your party is really all about the bringing together of like 2 very separate communities, or at least they used to be very separate. I don't know, it could be argued that they're more together now than they ever have been. What do you think is going to bring people together in this city?
Well, I suppose I might run the risk of disagreeing with the premise of the question. I think that certainly in Northern Ireland we have one community with lots of diversity. I think that regardless of your kind of religious persuasion, you will find much more in common with people on the other side than you maybe expect. And I think one of the key kind of aims and ambitions of the Alliance Party is to develop that recognition that we have much more in common than we do which divides us. And to that end, we spend a lot of time focusing on how we can build a shared Belfast where people can live, work, play, raise a family without their traditional background being the thing which they are known for. So we're interested in how you desegregate space, how you integrate communities, and how you develop an identity which is inclusive and which is welcoming. So, for example, the Alliance Party has long been encouraged by the arrival of new communities into Northern Ireland. So the bit of the city which I represent has one of the most diverse profiles of anywhere in Northern Ireland, which I think is fantastic. And to see some of the groups spring up and they bring their culture, they bring their food, they bring their world experience to Belfast is something which I really treasure, because it was something which was never around whenever I was growing up in the city, where we were much more homogenous as a society. And I think that really is to be welcomed. It presents some challenges, certainly, but I think that they can be overcome. And if our ambition is to lift Belfast from where it is to a recognisably vibrant European city, then I think we're going to have to embrace the other a little bit better than we have done so far.
You talked a little bit about the policing of protests and the funding that goes towards certain types of protest. The Alliance-sponsored decision a couple of years ago to change the days that the flag would fly above City Hall is quite contentious. Do you think that maybe set things back ever so slightly on the path forward?
Well, I think it was the right decision because it was the only one that we could have made at the time. We were faced with a decision to make around whether the flag would fly not at all, or fly on designated days, or fly every day of the year. It wasn't a decision that we forced, but it was one that we were faced with and one that we had to take. So the advice which we had from the Equality Commission and others was that designated days was in line with best practice across councils and other government buildings throughout the UK, and also balanced the constitutional position of Belfast as a city within the United Kingdom at the moment with the rights of people who have different legitimate constitutional aspirations. So it was, in some ways, I think it was portrayed in a more negative light than it could have been, because for the first time, I think Sinn Féin voted to fly the Union flag at all in Northern Ireland. And unionism has often had a narrative of every change being a sellout and every deviation from what went before is a defeat. And I think it's possible to construct another narrative which says that as we take some of the heat out of the constitutional debate in Northern Ireland, we allow space for normal politics to grow and to flourish. And that is something which I think we should all reflect on as we approach these kind of contentious issues, because, as I was saying earlier, it is my belief fundamentally that we share much more than divides us. And I think if that is the approach, then there isn't anything that we can't achieve as a city for our people.
That was the Alliance Party's Emmet McDonough-Brown, responding to claims in the Belfast Telegraph and outlining the Alliance Party's vision for Belfast. If you have any comments or queries about Mr. McDonough-Brown's answers, please get in contact with us at belfasticonoclast@gmail.com, send us a message on Facebook, Belfast Iconoclast, or connect with us on Twitter @BFastIconoclast. That's it for this episode. Thanks very much for listening.